Good evening. I'm Ruth Dickey, and I have the pleasure of serving as the Executive Director of Seattle Arts and Lectures, and I'm delighted you've joined us for an evening with Bill Gates. As we begin, I want to acknowledge that wherever you are joining us from, we are all on the unceded land of Indigenous people. Here in Seattle, we are on the traditional land of the Coast Salish people, including the Duwamish people, past, present, and future. Our huge, warm thanks go to the many partners who have made this evening possible. Thanks to our presenting sponsor, the Seattle Times. Thanks to tonight's Opus Plus sponsor, Slalom. Thanks to essay sponsor and production partner, Punch Drunk. Thank you to our haiku sponsors, Climate Solutions and GLY Construction. Thanks to tonight's bookselling partners and our partners in many ways, Booklarder, Elliott Bay Book Company, Island Books, Finney Books, Queen Anne Book Company, Secret Garden Books, Third Place Books, and University Bookstore. Because this hometown book launch celebration is virtual, we are able to partner with more bookstores on this event to share the book love. Thanks to tonight's restaurant partner, Ethan Stoll Restaurants, for collaborating with us to offer specially designed meals for us to enjoy at home. Thanks to our media sponsor for tonight, Grist. Thanks to our organizational supporters, all of whom are thanked on our website, and special thanks for major support of our public programs goes to For Culture, the Amazon Literary Partnership, Arts Fund, the City of Seattle Office of Arts and Culture, the National Endowment for the Arts, and the Washington State Arts Commission. Funding from these partners and support from people like you enables us to allocate 10% of our tickets to $5 student tickets or free tickets for community groups or individuals through our Community Access Ticket Program. And finally, thanks to all of you for inviting us into your homes and being here with us tonight. Tonight, we are celebrating the publication of Bill Gates' urgent and authoritative book, How to Avoid a Climate Disaster, the solutions we have, and the breakthroughs we need. The format for this evening will be a conversation between Bill Gates and Anderson Cooper. Due to time zone differences, this event was recorded in advance, and your questions were sent along to Anderson Cooper to weave into this conversation. If you are posting about this evening on social media, we hope you'll use the hashtag for tonight, SalGates. To open our evening, we have a brief video. Let's watch.
In a typical year, the world emits over 51 billion tons of greenhouse gases. And as we keep doing that, the consequences for human life will be catastrophic. When I first fell in love with computers as a teenager, they were enormous, expensive, and only the government and big companies could afford them. But my friends and I became obsessed with a wild idea. What could we do if there was a computer on every desk? And now the wild idea is quite tame. Billions of people not only have computers on their desks, but even in their pockets. Now the world needs another breakthrough. In fact, it needs many breakthroughs. We need to get from 51 billion tons to zero while still meeting the planet's basic needs. That means we need to transform the way we do almost everything. Our commitment to developing these innovations will mean the difference between a future where everyone can live a healthy, productive life and one where we're constantly dealing with the human and financial crises at a historic scale. Entrepreneurs and investors have to build new businesses and change existing businesses to get these solutions deployed. Government leaders have to enact new policies that drive the market for clean energy. And advocates have to keep their voices loud to hold all of us accountable for rapid progress. Avoiding a climate disaster will be one of the greatest challenges humans have ever taken on. Greater than landing on the moon, greater than eradicating smallpox, even greater than putting a computer on every desk. My basic optimism about climate change comes from my belief in innovation. It's our power to invent that makes me hopeful.
Hey, I'm Anderson Cooper. I want to welcome all of you in Seattle and watching around the country to this really exciting event. We are coming to you through the Seattle Arts and Lectures series, and I want to thank them for their introduction. I want to welcome Bill Gates as well. Bill, thanks so much for doing this. I've read the book. The book, of course, is How to Avoid a Climate Disaster, the solutions we have and the breakthroughs that we need. As somebody who has read a bunch of stuff on climate change, I got to say this, to me, is the most kind of visionary and also just clear and interesting book I've read. There's a lot of stuff out there which is, as you know, a little bit arcane. Like, you like that arcane stuff, but I really prefer that. So I want to get right into it for a couple of things, because you and I were able to spend a couple of days together for when we were doing this piece for 60 minutes. And it was really kind of eye-opening to me, the scale of what you are calling for. Can you just talk a little bit, given this pandemic, why did you write this book about climate change and release it now?
Yeah, I've been, learning about climate change for quite a while. But in 2019, what I saw was amazing to me, which is that the interest in solving the problem, particularly by young people and not just one party or the other, the interest level is very, very high. And I was considering publishing the book in 2020, but then as the pandemic was developing, the work of the Gates Foundation on the vaccines and other tools meant that wasn't going to be a good year. The world appropriately wanted to see the pandemic as the top priority. But, there's three ingredients to solve climate. One is you have to have the right goal. And I'm impressed everyone's picked this goal of 0 by 2050. You have to have the interest level, because, we need voters to drive policies because government plays such a central role. But then finally, you need a plan. And I thought, based on my experience at Microsoft and the foundation, thinking about innovation, which is harder in the climate space than any space I've ever worked in. It's more capital, just the physical scale is kind of mind-blowing. I thought, hey, helping to put a plan together and describe some of the work I'm doing to contribute to that plan, it would be very timely as we come out of the pandemic and we have Europe spending recovery money, the US looking at lots of recovery money. How do we make sure that we go full speed on solving climate, and really make sure people understand it's not going to be easy. It's going to be actually very, very hard, but also make it clear that it's not impossible. It really is within reach.
Well, you also write about in the book that it's important not to just go after what you term the low-hanging fruit. And the low-hanging fruit, I assume, is electric vehicles, solar panels, things that are important, but not when you look at the whole pie of all the things that contribute to the 51 billion tons of CO2 in the atmosphere every year. And in fact, can you just talk about what makes up all of the emissions?
Yeah, if there's one takeaway from the book that I want to have people remember, it's that we have lots of sources of emissions. In fact, I've got a slide that I think will help make this point. It is passenger cars, because transportation, is a big thing, but that's only about 7%. It is electricity generation overall, but that's about 27%. And you have other things in transportation like planes, but then you have the three other sectors that people may not associate with solving this problem. You've got agriculture, where you have livestock and fertilizer manufacture and animal manure handling, and that's 19%. And you've got heating and cooling buildings, which we mostly use natural gas for that. That's 7%. And then the biggest single sector is actually manufacturing at 31%. And that's where you've got cement. That's where you've got steel. Those are the two biggest. But it's pretty broad. We make a lot of physical stuff. And if you look around, and you see the plastic, the paper, the wallboard, the cement and steel that makes the building stand up. Every physical thing, sadly, is associated with some level of emissions, and we have to rework the way that we make those things.
To me, that is the most kind of eye-opening thing that comes across in the book, and it's hard for me to still wrap my mind around it. You talk about the room you're sitting in. People who are watching right now, maybe they're at home, they're watching on a computer screen. The plastic that their computer is made out of, the wood that their desk is made out of, how it was cut. The machines probably use gas to run. The cement in the building they live in, the steel the building is made out of. Every aspect of what you see needs to have innovation, needs to change the way we make it, right?
That's right. The physical economy has gotten all these things to be so cheap that most people have never been to a cement plant or a steel plant. The fact that there were brilliant innovators that drove those things, and it's incredible. And the recipe for how we make those things is kind of fixed because we know it's reliable and cheap. And so to be open-minded to say, no, we need to change those building codes. We need to build a market for something that at first, green steel costs a lot more than normal steel. Green cement costs almost 3 times what normal cement costs. And so how do you get going? How do you get on that learning curve where you start to buy some, and the more you make, you figure out, just like happened with solar panels, that volume drove the price down as companies competed to make it at lower price. When you don't have a market, that doesn't happen. And so bootstrapping across all those areas of emissions, that we drive the R&D, we drive the innovators, but then as they come up with things, we have buying that gets us on that scale up learning curve to get the price way, way down and get a green premium that's either very, very small or near zero. That's the path to nirvana.
I want to go over the course of this. I want to go to some of the details on things like cement, because it's something I never really thought much about, but the scale of the problem does seem at times insurmountable. But can you just talk kind of broad picture first? What are you doing about climate change?
Yeah, so given the innovation agenda, there's policy things for all of it. Funding basic R&D, and R&D budgets in these areas had not gone up as we got to the 2015 climate talks, and so that kind of got on the agenda there, and it's still, there's a lot that has to be done. So lots of things about policy, but there's kind of a pipeline for innovation. In fact, this is another one where I've got a slide that I use to describe it that might be helpful. Way at the beginning, it's just basic R&D. It's like, the National Institute of Health working on biological things. Then we want to bring in smart people and fund them even before their ideas are they can raise money on a private basis. So we have a thing where we're bringing smart people together called fellows, early stage. Then something can be venture funded. So that's Breakthrough Energy Ventures that we put together several funds, and that's going super well. And then finally is this piece about buying the products, which we call Catalyst. And that, together with these market shaping policies, can get to where, at least for some of the categories, like passenger cars, over the next 10 to 15 years, as the range goes up, the charging stations are pervasive, the charge time, goes down to be like filling a gas tank, then you can get a zero green premium. But that one is the most mature of all the sectors. So we have to apply this pipeline across all those different areas of emissions. And I'm working on advocacy, but specifically fellows, the venture fund, and Catalyst to accelerate that pipeline. And you can see it over time. Well, I hope what that means is that green premium which is over 5 trillion a year right now, goes down by about 95%.
I just want to break down this chart a little bit because I'm confused by charts always, so it takes me a moment. But for folks at home or who are watching, Breakthrough Energy Ventures is an investment fund that you started about, I think it was 6 years ago. You recruited a bunch of super wealthy people who everybody would know their names, and I think you raised $1 billion. I think now there's a second $1 billion that you've raised, and you're looking for not just some quick way to make money. You are looking for people who are willing to invest long range, because a lot of it, like hedge funds and stuff, they invest for 5 years and then they all want their money back and their huge returns. You're saying for real development, for real innovation, you need a 20-year investment maybe for in some things with no guarantee, frankly, that it's going to work.
Right. So the most mature part of this in terms of what I'm doing is Breakthrough Energy Ventures. And it's exactly as you say, we're just announced the second fund, and that's going well. We found lots of amazing companies, although we'll have a high failure rate. We only fund companies that if their work is successful, can eliminate 0.5% of the 51 billion tons of emissions. And so we need, companies in steel and cement and other things. Because that ventures piece has gone so well, and they've been able to work with other investors to raise that money, we're putting a thing at the earlier stage, fellows, where we just, fund people at $250,000 a year to shape their ideas coming out of big companies or academia. And then we're putting something that is after ventures, which is the catalyst buying piece. So those two pieces I'm just putting together this year to complement the ventures piece because it's gone so well.
And just so people know, the green premium that's on that chart, which starts out obviously higher on the left-hand side and then gradually gets smaller. Just explain, green premium is the extra cost making it making it with zero carbon emissions, adds on to the price of the development, the price of the actual product. And you want that green premium to go down, just like solar panels used to be far more expensive because more innovation is taking place, more people are using them, the price actually goes down and the quality actually goes up. That's what needs to happen in basically everything related to carbon emissions, all products, right?
Exactly. So the green premium is very different for different products. And I promise you I only have this, maybe my last slide, but I love slides.
I love that you travel with slides.
You bet. PowerPoint, that's my favorite. So for passenger cars, where Tesla and others have done a brilliant job, and you even have people like GM saying as of 2035, they're only going to make electric cars. So that clearly shows that they think that the demand in the market will shift over. Today, you pay more upfront for an electric car, and you have to worry a little bit about the range and where you're going to do the charging. But as the batteries get better, those prices go down. We'll go from what is a fairly small green premium today. I show on this slide, I'm comparing a Chevrolet Malibu to a Chevrolet Bolt, which is an electric vehicle. And I show about a 15% green premium there. That's as of today, but I expect in the next 10 to 15 years, actually the electric car would be preferable. So that's amazing. Eventually you won't have to have tax credits and zero emission requirements. On the other side of the slide, though, I show a product that we haven't made progress on, which is cement. And there you see that today's cement's $125 a ton. And yet if you try and make it in a green way, it basically doubles the price. And so that's one where we're not, we don't have a Tesla of cement. It's not clear, where that will come from. But we have to drive for that because cement is responsible just by itself for 6% of all those emissions. So if you want to get to zero, you can't skip cement.
And what the thing that's fascinating to me about cement, which is a sentence I never thought I would actually say, is that, which I read in your book, is that if you make a ton of cement, you release a ton of CO2. I mean, it's a 1-to-1 ratio.
Yeah, it's incredible that between heating up the limestone, where you're generally burning a hydrocarbon like natural gas, and the chemical reaction where you're pulling that calcium out, it's actually CO2 that gets released. And so you have those two sources. And cement is very, very cheap, and the number of cement plants in the world is, over 10,000. And so we're asking every one of those to put some new equipment in. There's a little bit of progress. There's a company, Carbon Cure, that cuts it by 10%.
Which is a
And there's
company
other
Breakthrough Energy Ventures has invested in, right?
exactly. So that's a start. But wow, we have to get to 100%, and that it's not even clear how to go about that. But we have lots of people with great ideas, and if we back them and give them policies, and even when the premium is still non-zero, we create some demand for them to scale up, then we can get the same thing to happen there that happened with the electrified passenger car.
This company, Carbon Cure, which you're talking about, is a Canadian company that Breakthrough Energy Ventures invested in. And one of the things that you showed me that they do is they take CO2 and they actually inject it, one day perhaps re-injecting it into the cement itself. It turns into a mineral and it hardens. So you're trapping certain amounts of CO2 inside the very cement that has created CO2.
Yeah, it's a fantastic thing. And you need a little less cement, because when they put that CO2 in there, it bulks it up, but maintains all of the kind of strength and durability that you expect out of cement.
So how much potentially does that eliminate from the
right now, the thing they're actually have a lot of North America cement makers using today, it's only a 10% reduction. They have a next generation that they're piloting, which they hope will get up to 30%. And so if you take Carbon Cure, and there's maybe a dozen other companies with different ways of reducing that, if you combine those together, you could see that green premium really starting to come down. But even 10% is fantastic, because you got to get started somewhere.
With the pandemic going on, I mean, does the pandemic and climate change have things in common in your mind?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, because I would have come out with the book last spring if the pandemic hadn't come along and became, such a big focus for me in the foundation works and for the world, that, it was completely open-ended. Would we be able to invent a vaccine? Could we, make that at scale? And so I pushed the book into this spring. Even now, I said, okay, is this timely? Well, the idea that government needs to have a lot of experts come together and figure out what the risks are, earthquake risks, war risks, tornadoes, climate change and pandemics have been neglected. And now we realize in the case of the pandemic, the tragedy is gigantic. And yet if we invested in advance, it would have been, 90% less damaging. We would have all been more like Australia than the United States or most of Europe. And so in the sense of reminding us the importance of government investing in advance, this is like the pandemic. Now, climate change requires more innovation than just, a single vaccine, and the scale of it is, in a different league. I'd say it's almost 100 times more difficult. And so we need a broad set of people to care, to weigh in on this, because, it just gets worse over time if you don't invest up front.
So let's talk about what the future does hold if we do not get to zero emissions by 2050. And obviously, different people have different theories, but I just had a son. He's almost going to be 1 year old in a couple of months. If he lives to 80, the turn of the century, what will he see? What will the impact be?
Yeah, that's a super important point, which is that if we continue these emissions, or even reduce them by 50%, the temperature just keeps going up because CO2 stays in the atmosphere for thousands of years. And so then you get, the ice melting, so sea levels going up a lot. You get natural ecosystems like coral reefs go away. Near the equator, you won't be able to grow crops or work outside. And so you have gigantic human migration.
You won't be able to work outside.
That's right. The human body sweats in order to avoid overheating. But if you get a high enough temperature and high enough humidity, that stops working. And so you literally cannot work outdoors. And a lot of the poorest on the planet live near the equator, where they do outdoor farming or construction. And so all those people will, because in the summer they can't do that work, they will try to migrate to the more temperate zones. And so the cataclysm in terms of the instability that comes will be pretty gigantic. It won't just be wildfires or floods. And we can't predict exactly how bad it'll be, but certainly by the turn of the century, it'll be the most negative thing that's ever happened to humanity.
The most negative thing that's ever happened to humanity. I mean, you're talking more than World War I, more than World War II.
Yeah, the death rate per year will be over 5 times what the current pandemic is, and it'll just be going up over time as you get hotter and hotter.
So the migration, the people fleeing the war in Syria that we've seen, that's tiny compared to what you're talking about.
Yeah, it's incredible how, partly because of how hot it is, they had a lot of crop failures in Syria, and that created a lot of tension. And then you had the political unrest, and just a few million people migrating up to Europe caused a lot of turmoil, political uncertainty. And this is, more than 20 times as big in terms of the number of people who will be trying to move into temperate countries.
Some people listening to this are going to say, okay, look, that's a doomsday scenario. And, how can you predict something that's going to be 80 years from now? Back in the 60s and 70s, there were books about the population explosion, predicting mass starvation by now, and that hasn't occurred. So smart people believe that in the 60s and 70s. Well, what did they get wrong, and why are you right?
Yeah, then that was an incredible thing in that they missed 2 things. One was that we could take our seeds in what was called the Green Revolution, funded by Rockefeller Foundation and others, and make them dramatically more productive. And so Asia, which faced mass starvation, was able to grow more crops. The other surprise was that as families got wealthier and as kids survived through their childhood, and as women got more educated, then families chose to have far less children. And so, ironically, in the places with the worst health in the world, like parts of Africa, families have 6 children. Whereas as we've improved health, there's been this demographic revolution that even in places like Mexico, they're now having just replacement levels. So the population growth, because of those health advances and other things, went way, way down. And so we were able to feed Asia. But this time, unless we drive the innovation, they won't arrive in time.
So why 2050, and why will that, and why is that the final, the point of no return?
Yeah, that's a super good question. I mean, honestly, if we could do 2040, then you get less heating and you get less damage. And this idea of helping with adaptation, helping with better seeds and flood control, that we are going to have to invest a lot in, it would be better. 2050 is basically the earliest date that it's plausible that we could get to zero. And it requires an immense amount of effort, the biggest thing humanity's ever done. It'll make all the other things, ending wars or pandemics, will be very small, because this is such a gigantic retooling that has to happen literally for the entire globe. And so this thing is going to be very hard. People will say, hey, let's get it done in 10 years. We'll just divest some stocks or we'll make companies report their emissions. Sadly, it's way harder than that. And thinking it's easy almost hurts the cause. We have to admit that it's going to be super hard. But it's not impossible. The kind of innovations, whether it's personal computing or coronavirus vaccine, the ingenuity of humanity. If you get lots of people working on lots of ideas, that's what makes me optimistic. Which is the bottom line of the book, is that we can avoid a climate disaster.
But the problem is, it's not just convincing the United States. First of all, given that it's been hard to convince people in the United States everybody to wear masks, I think there's a lot of people out there who think, well, that doesn't sound very promising, that we have to, get everybody on board with this. Is that even possible? And also, it's not just the United States or Europe that has to agree to this. It's everybody. And right now with China and India, I mean, they're building coal plants right and left.
Now, that's a super good point. The U.S. Is only responsible for about 15% of all emissions. China passed us by in total emissions a few years ago. And so if just the rich countries do it, we do not succeed. But the innovation power, the U.S. has still got over half of the world's innovation power. And so if we take the green premiums across the products and bring those down by something like 95%, then it's not just makes it easier for the US to zero out our emissions, it makes it easier for all the countries, including India, which has not yet committed to getting to zero. China has a commitment to get there by 2060. Hopefully they'll accelerate that. Hopefully they'll stop building coal plants because, as you say, both in China and other countries, they're still involved in making more coal plants, which works, absolutely the wrong way. As soon as you build one of those plants, you're going to want to run it for longer than 30 years. And so, it's kind of proof that you're not serious about getting to zero. So that makes this a big challenge. But, as you bring green premiums down, it gets easier to make stronger reduction commitments.
It's hard, though, because you spend a lot of time in India and the developing world. If, people want a better life and the chance to have a better home or a better, better roads and everything, that's what human beings want and deserve. So it's hard to say to the, people in a country that doesn't have as much as the United States, say, well, look, you got to sacrifice.
That's a super good point. Those countries aren't responsible for most of the emissions that are up there in the atmosphere causing this heating. And they're still trying to provide very basic levels of shelter and air conditioning to deal with the heating, light at nighttime so their kids can study. And so we can't, just by reducing consumption globally, that is not the just way to solve the problem. It will help if rich countries, aren't emitting as much, even as we move these processes to zero. Reducing the volume of emitting activities will help us, but that alone is not the path to get us to zero. And so we've got to be able to say to India in 2050, when you build new buildings, use green cement and green steel, and that either we're subsidizing part of that or the innovation has meant the extra cost to do it that way is quite modest.
The other thing that people don't really focus on, which you thankfully are, is the electrical grid, which again, I knew nothing about, but it's actually kind of fascinating what you say about it. You've actually kind of mapped it out and shown that, because right now in California, I think no nuclear plants, they said there'll be no new nuclear plants, and wind and solar will provide all that we need. You say that's not actually possible.
Yeah, that's an unfortunate thing, is that even though the cost of solar and wind have come down so much and we should install massively more of it, the reliability of your electricity is super important. And you can get long periods where, say, a cold front sits over the Midwest and shuts down all of the wind and solar there. And so either we have to have a miracle of being able to store that much energy, which is 20 times more difficult than doing electric cars, or we need some source of power that can run even when those weather conditions are very, very bad. And that, at scale, that would mean either nuclear fission or nuclear fusion. And so we should do our best to get this storage miracle so we can do it that way. But if we can't do it that way, then one of the two nuclear technologies will be very important so that you're not freezing to death when you have these super bad weather conditions. And the open source grid model that Breakthrough Energy Science is building is to let people play around with, okay, what are your assumptions about the transmission grid that's going to have to be a lot bigger than it is today? What are your assumptions about the generation and use of energy? And can we maintain the low cost and the high reliability while not driving the price up dramatically?
Because actually what you're calling for is actually more electricity, greater use of electricity, and the current electrical grids, it's just not going to be possible with the current grid. But explain the problem of updating the grid.
Right. So the electricity is really the only source of energy that it's clear we can make zero emissions. And so instead of heating your house with natural gas that does cause emissions, you'll buy what's called an electric heat pump that does the heating and cooling by using electricity. And so as you get that electricity to zero, you avoid those emissions. But as we shift that to electricity, and as we get the passenger cars and we shift them to electricity, you're going to have to grow the electric grid to be 2 to 3 times bigger, the total amount of electricity generated, because the energy's got to come from somewhere.
2 to 3 times bigger than it currently is.
Yeah, in the United States and in other countries where it's growing because demand is growing, it's even higher than that. And so the difficulty of permitting transmission across federal lands or private lands where you need, all these rights to go these long distances, that's proven to be so difficult that very little new transmission is being built. And yet, if you model out what a green future looks like with more electricity and keeping it reliable, we need dramatically more transmission. So that needs to get on the political agenda. That is there a technology that makes that more acceptable? Do you need to pay people for the benefits that giving those right-of-ways provides? And so it's, it's not happening. And yet we only have 30 years to get all that transmission done.
See, this is where I get really depressed because, this is kind of thing, once you start to scratch away at this, okay, we still need nuclear power for 20% of even if wind and solar, but then there's the problem with, more electricity and the grid. I don't understand how you seem optimistic, and certainly, you make it seem possible, but it seems just really, really friggin' hard.
It's hard, absolutely. I mean, but if you look, when we had a world war, we shifted the economy and the amount of innovation, even during that 4-year period, was quite phenomenal.
But that's what it has to take. I mean, you're talking about a global effort. Do you see signs of that? I mean, obviously, the U.S. is now going to go back into the Paris Climate Accord.
Yeah, that's a good thing. And, we are at an early stage on this problem. And, we've got the goal and we've got a lot of energy, which, thank God for that. That's the only way this gets done, is particularly if the younger generation is speaking out about this as a real priority. But it's daunting. And, as you're shifting these industries, there are regions of the country that feel that might hurt them. And so in addition to all this innovation of the bigger electric grid, which hopefully those things are providing a lot of new jobs, you have to think about the areas of the country that, have hydrocarbon extraction and related things that are part of their jobs base, and how do you involve them in the new activities? So the people who are more adept politically than I am have reminded me the idea of making sure there's no significant losers in this is as important to drive the agenda as the clear plan for the innovation part.
Foods like Beyond Meat, I mean, that's something you've obviously invested in. How much of a help is that?
Yeah, so the agricultural sector, which is at 19%, is the third. Manufacturing 31, electricity 27, and then 19. Part of that 6% are that cows. They burp, they fart, and that's methane, which is a powerful greenhouse gas.
Wait a minute, 6% of the greenhouse gases are from cows burping and farting.
Exactly. And people have been trying to change what they feed them, or think about different things. But a more radical approach is what Beyond Meat, Impossible, and many other companies are doing, which are saying, hey, let's make a product, let's say that's like ground beef, and that in terms of animal cruelty, greenhouse gases, and eventually how good it tastes and the cost can actually eventually compete there. And it's been great as Impossible and Beyond to put their products out in various restaurants. The demand for people who care about this has actually been pretty high, and they can probably engineer in some health benefits as well. So that artificial meat market has actually surprised me. 5 years ago, I would have said agriculture was the area I was most worried about. The innovation there is coming pretty quickly. Now it needs to be scaled up, just like the electric cars. But now I worry more about the manufacturing because I'm seeing so much innovation in this agricultural space.
So cement, steel, that is what really worries you right now.
That's the hardest one that we've made the least progress on, and where the green premiums are very, very high. And that means it's just hard to get anybody to buy green cement. Now we want the government to buy some. We want tech companies that do very well to buy some. We have to bootstrap it. I call it catalyst. We have to bootstrap that down. But
because the more they buy, the more companies and people who can afford it buy green products or green technology. That's going to lower the cost for everybody else. And
right, and consumers, in the case of their car and their beef, they can participate in that. And I'd say that after their political voice is the next most important thing that they can do is be willing to pay a bit of a green premium for these products. So just like solar did, it comes down, and eventually the quality and price actually are better. That's the zero green premium case.
We've got a bunch of questions from people in the audience, and I want to ask you a couple of them. One of them, I don't have a name on this one, but can you update us on TerraPower? The documentary with you discussed the venture, but the China-U.S. trade war had put the effort on hold. What's happening now? TerraPower is a company that you've invested in, that's building a new kind of nuclear reactor.
Exactly. It's so-called fourth generation reactor, which may be necessary to have reliable electricity even during tough weather periods. As the questioner says, our initial strategy was a joint venture in China, but as the relationships with China deteriorated, the U.S. government canceled that. And fortunately now, the U.S. government is funding advanced reactor demonstration project here in the U.S. And so TerraPower won a $4 billion project to build that. So over the next 5 years, we'll demonstrate that it really works, and we'll show that the safety and the cost are very, very different than the previous generation. So we have to prove out the engineering, which is, going to take amazing work. But we also have to convince the public that this would be acceptable in order for it to make a significant contribution to climate change. And the only reason I'm involved at all is because I see it might be a needed piece of an overall climate change solution.
Obviously people are very concerned about nuclear. There's a lot of folks who just, believe that it's impossible to make it safe. The picture that we just had up is actually sort of a mock-up of fuel rods, which is where uranium is stored in this prototype for a new reactor. You say that just on the safety front, that basically your reactor, it's going to be cheaper to make because the cost for making reactors on the old model, and I know you say that they've been using the same essential model for nuclear reactors since the 50s and 60s. They've just been adding on to it. So the costs are prohibitive. So this is actually cheaper to make. It's automated, so it doesn't have as the potential for human error. But just on a scientific basis, you are claiming that this reactor will be safe. And can you just explain kind of briefly how you can say that?
Yeah, so the problem with reactors is that as you take that energy out of the uranium, which, a single uranium atom provides 1 million times as much energy as a hydrocarbon. So you think, wow, this is incredible. The problem is that as the uranium splits, some of the products are radioactive. And of course, radioactivity is very dangerous. And so you have to prove that your reactor can't release those radioactive materials so they leave the reactor. In the past, that was done with all sorts of humans and, certain containment. Here, we need to say that there's no high pressure anywhere in the plant, that, if something breaks, then that, it's pushing those radioactive materials around. You have to say that all the heat can be stored there, so you don't overheat anything that is inside that reactor. And nobody's been willing to start from scratch. Nobody's been able to use digital simulation. All the old reactors were based on an idea from the 1950s that used water, very hot, high pressure water. Here, we're actually using sodium liquid metal. And so the safety is built in. It doesn't depend on, the operator doing the right thing. It's just physics.
The old reactors were light water reactors, which the water ran over and around those fuel rods that you were showing. You have liquid sodium, which can't reach a boiling point. Is that right?
That's right. I don't know if we brought up the picture of the rods, but the water is replaced by this liquid sodium, and it flows over those rods and takes the heat out, and then that's used for the electricity generation. Sodium doesn't boil like water does. It just stays in that nice liquid form, even when the reactor shuts down, which was the problem at Chernobyl and Fukushima. You can't have that overheating condition. And so, we have to start by building the demo plant and getting the regulators to say, yes, this is incredibly safe. And then if we get to that point, which I'm hopeful we will, then we've got to go to the public and say, have an open mind about a completely new generation, because climate change is coming and you still want reliable electricity.
Todd wants to know, do you think it's possible to develop a technology to reliably and safely remove a significant volume of carbon from the atmosphere?
That's a super good question. There are two places you could try to grab the carbon dioxide. One is in the chimney of a power plant or steel plant. There's tons of CO2 coming out. Now it's coming out with all sorts of other chemicals. So that is called point capture. The other thing is to actually just have a plant that sits, and as the wind blows, it has some process that's pulling those 410 parts per million of CO2 out of the air, and that's called direct air capture. There are companies like Climeworks or Carbon Engineering who do that, but the cost per ton that they pull out is over $400 right now. And so that, is way too expensive.
And you're talking about 51 billion tons a year.
Exactly. So if you multiply by 400, that's 20 trillion a year, and that's a quarter of the world economy.
So there are 20 trillion, Bill? Really?
Yeah, at $400 a ton. Yeah. So Breakthrough Energy is investing in a number of these carbon capture companies. Elon Musk just did a big prize challenge to reward somebody who's doing that well. But it always costs money to pull the CO2 out. So, that's an infinite green premium because there's no value. The clean approach costs, the dirty approach costs zero. This is just an extra cost. But for some of the emissions, we may have to use direct air capture. And, the question is, can you get it down to $100 a ton or lower to make it affordable?
We've got two questions from viewers about what they can do, but before we get there, I just want to ask you something with kind of some of these questions are based on, which is essentially the criticism of you that you no doubt have heard, which is, is it hypocritical for you to be promoting all these things when your carbon footprint is extremely large?
Yeah, I probably have one of the largest carbon footprints because I have a plane. And, my house is big. And so, I'm funding at over $7 million a year approaches like for sustainable green aviation fuel and for carbon capture to eliminate that footprint. Now, I hope to do that in a way so that not only am I eliminating my footprint, I'm also helping products like green aviation fuel get more demand so that it scales up and the premium there, which is almost 300%, can be brought down. But, no doubt I have to plead guilty that my footprint is very large. Now I can afford to kind of in a brute force $400 a ton way by that to zero. Most people can't do that. Because
that gets the question Ray asks is, what is the best way for those most able to invest to help those most in need of climate change mitigation investment?
Yeah, so our goal is to eventually have a thing that even individual consumers can give, a few hundred a year to, or what, ever corresponds with their carbon footprint, and that it's buying these green products. It's catalytic in bootstrapping those markets. Today, there's not that good of a vehicle. There are some offsets out there, but the duration of the benefit, say, of some of the tree planting schemes is still being examined. So we need to have high quality offset things, including this program catalyst, that people who care about can even, on a yearly basis, help out with a donation.
Emily also has a question. What's the best way for those of us with middle class incomes to combat the climate crisis? I mean, for anybody, people obviously many people want to do as much as they can. What do you recommend?
Yeah, so there's three things. First is their political voice, and so that we can get both parties engaged, maybe not with identical views, but agreeing this is a super big problem. And so over the next 30 years, we don't have a stop and start approach that would prevent large companies from building a new steel plant or cement plant because they don't know if the rules are going to incentivize that or not. So, number one is your political voice. Number two is your consumer activity for a lot of these products, and there'll be more and more over time. And then the third is that we should have a giving vehicle either to climate advocates, and there's a lot of great organizations who do that, or to this thing that's going to buy green products and bring those prices down called Catalyst. And so, yes, we need broad-based involvement. This is not something that just a few very rich people can come anywhere near solving.
We have to wrap up soon, but I mean, just what is it? I mean, I know you've sort of talked about this, given your experiences with the computer revolution, but I mean, what is it that gives you hope about this?
Yeah, it is hard. It's, making new software is way easier. Even making new medicines, despite the regulatory burden, which is appropriate for the safety concerns, that's way easier. Here it's so broad what we're doing. I almost wish I could show people just pictures of cement plants and steel plants and how many there are. And it's super hard, but the energy behind this, and the desire to maintain these natural ecosystems, the desire to keep things livable near the equator, I do think that's coming into gear. During the pandemic, I worried that people would become much more short term, and yet if you poll particularly young people about climate, they're more committed than ever, and the governments are responding to that with their various recovery plans. So, there are days that it can seem like it's too tough, but overall, I do think we'll come together and solve the problem.
Does this take away from all the work that you and your wife Melinda are doing through the foundation? I mean, are you able to do all this stuff?
Yeah, in terms of our time and resources, our primary focus is the foundation, and it'll stay that way. I put several billion into climate already. I'll put several billion more in, but the bulk of the wealth is going to the Gates Foundation for things like the global health work, and that in terms of the team that gets how to get rid of polio and malaria. We've made that a priority, and we're going to stay constant and get rid of those infectious diseases. So, I'm lending my voice and some resources to climate, but, we need a huge, broad coalition of people, and, I hope my book, gives them a sense of, okay, what are all the pieces that go into this? But, galvanizing government is not the work of just a few people. It's got to be millions of people.
You said you put so far $7 billion into trying to come up with innovation on climate change, and you're going to do
$2 billion. Right.
$2 billion. Okay. And you plan to do like what lies ahead? I mean, do you plan
another $2 billion in the next 5 years, and that's breakthrough energy ventures, TerraPower, carbon engineering, lots of the companies that are trying to do low green premium work.
Do you get personally upset when an investment doesn't pan out? I mean, you're investing in a lot of stuff which just, I talked to you about this a couple of days ago. That sounds, even to you, sounds crazy.
80% of these companies will end up not, having a breakthrough. But if 20% do, and some in every one of the areas of emissions, that is phenomenal. And even economically, one of the battery companies, QuantumScape, went public, and it's highly valued now because people see that when you get a good solution, eventually the volume, the demand for the green products is going to be super high. So there's tons of failures. But some of them will be like a Google or a Microsoft with, mind-blowing success.
For those who haven't read the book or just ordered it and are waiting for it, what is the number one thing that they should take away right now from what lies ahead and what possible solutions are, or what the biggest part of the problem is?
Well, understanding the 51 billion and some of the sources, understanding this idea of the green premium, and understanding where their voice can be super important. And, people who say it's impossible, we need to convince them that's wrong. People who say it's easy, we need to convince them it's wrong. No matter what else your politics are, hopefully climate, at least some of the approaches to solving the problem, we realize that, we're all in this together, including that need for global cooperation. So, kicking off the maturity of the field to, use these 30 years as best we possibly can, with the innovation pipeline being a big part of that, but it's very policy enabled. So, I hope they, feel like I've educated them, shared some of my own learning journey, and how fascinated I am by this, and that they'll join in.
But before we go, I just do want to ask you, because I am really interested in your process in learning stuff. I find it fascinating. You take online courses. on subjects you're interested in, and you have basically you just study stuff. You are reading thousands of pages of studies. I saw binders on your desk of, obscure scientific studies. That is something you do constantly.
Well, I enjoy that. I'm in a way, I've always been a student, and the material that's online now, my ability to have experts come and meet with me and help me when I'm confused. I'm very, very lucky. And starting in 2005, I set aside 5 or 6 half days a year to do those educational sessions. And that's, I needed to understand ice melting and coral reef dying and climate models and carbon capture. So it was pretty broad with an amazing amount of reading.
What was the first book you started with on understanding climate and weather?
Well, there's a lot of books, but the one that was the most basic was called Weather for Dummies. And, the title is kind of ironic because anybody who's interested in learning how weather works is no dummy. I mean, you have to be a very curious person. They do a very good job of minimizing the concepts like, okay, the air at various temperatures holds different amounts of water, and that kind of explains clouds and why it rains where it rains. And they actually do a super job.
I just love that you started out with Weather for Dummies, which is, we all know the series. So.
Yeah, it really, the ones I've tried have been really great. And, nobody should be embarrassed reading that kind of a book in public.
I know when I told you this, when I went on Jeopardy for the first time, was the dumbed down, celebrity version of Jeopardy. But I panicked and I thought I should study. So I got all the don't know much about history books and don't know much about geography books. They're good books. All those books are very good.
No, it's fun to keep learning.
Yeah.
And, climate, a lot of things will go better than we expect and some will be more difficult. So it's going to be very dynamic, and, we all have to enjoy the learning journey we're going to be on.
Yeah. Well, I mean, How to Avoid a Climate Disaster is Bill's book, and it really is. It's a fascinating read. It's funny, and just it is encouraging. It's such a massive problem, and it seems so insurmountable. And yours is the first book I've read where you sort of see a road potentially through it, and a difficult road, but a fascinating one, and one you're obviously making possible. So thank you for talking to us. I want to thank everybody in Seattle and around the country and the world who is watching. I want to thank Seattle Arts and Lectures for making this possible. The book again, How to Avoid a Climate Disaster. Bill Gates. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Anderson.
Thank you so much, Bill Gates and Anderson Cooper, for that important conversation. And thank you, Bill Gates, for elevating a hopeful path to heal our planet and avert a climate disaster. We hope you will join us for the beloved and prolific Bill Bryson on February 21st, poet Toy Derricott on February 26th, and artist and writer Myra Kalman on March 15th. And we'd love for you to join us to hear from Ibram X. Kendi, author of How to Be an Anti-Racist, on April 7th, and Robin Wall Kimmerer, author of Braiding Sweetgrass, on April 21st. Meanwhile, on behalf of all of us at SAL, we wish you books that bring you the world and sustaining conversations. Thank you, and good night.